Hi, I'm Merrick. The last thing I heard before the door slammed in my face at 1 a.m. was my father screaming, "You're no longer part of this family." My mother watched from the stairs. No tears, just silence. My brother smirked. They thought I'd disappear. But what they didn't know was the money they lived on. It came from me. And when I cut it off, they fell apart. Now they're the ones begging to be let back in. But would you unlock the door for the people who made you feel worthless in your own home? The message from Dad came just after midnight. "We need to talk. Come now." No emojis, no explanation. Just those 5 clipped words that managed to set off every alarm in my chest. I pulled into the driveway at 1:03 a.m. The porch light was on, casting a pale wash across the lawn like a stage light waiting for something dramatic to unfold. The house looked the same chipped shutters, same creaky porch steps. But the way it stared back at me made my stomach knot. The front door creaked open before I could knock. Inside, halfway up the stairs, stood my mother, Elaine, in her silk robe, and my older brother Trent, arms folded, chin raised like a smug doorman. Neither of them said a word. Just stood there, like spectators waiting for a show. Then Dad yanked the door wide and stepped out. "You think you're better than us, Merrick?" he snapped. I froze. "What?" "You undermined your brother. You've always done it, behind our backs, acting like we're some kind of burden to your golden little life." "What are you talking about?" I said, trying to keep my voice even. "You called me here." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You want distance? You got it. You're not welcome here anymore." And just like that, he hurled my overnight bag onto the porch. It landed with a hollow thud against the doorframe. "You are no longer part of this family," he said, his voice sharp and final, like he was cutting a rope. I took a breath. My eyes flicked past him, just for a second. That's when I saw it. Trent was smirking, a slow, calculated, victorious curl of the lips, like this was his moment, like he'd been waiting for this night for years. And my mother, she looked at me and then away. No tears, no protest, just turned her face like she couldn't even bear to acknowledge I was hers. Then the door slammed shut. I stood there for a beat, my ears ringing in the sudden silence. The cold slipped through my coat and into my spine. In my pocket, my fingers found the old brass key I'd carried since I was 17. It still had the red rubber cover I'd put on it in college so I wouldn't mix it up with dorm keys. Funny how something so small could hold so much history. I turned it over in my palm, hoping, maybe against reason, that I could still use it, still go inside and tell them this was all some kind of misunderstanding. But I didn't even try. I looked at that key, and for the first time in my life, it felt like nothing. "Guess this doesn't open anything anymore," I muttered, voice barely above the wind. I bent down and picked up my bag. The porch light across the street flicked on. Probably the Carsons, who always acted like the neighborhood watch was their personal reality show. I could almost hear them. "He's finally gotten what's been coming to him." I kept my head down and walked to the car. No tears came. Just a tight, burning pressure in my chest, the kind that feels like a fuse quietly sizzling towards something bigger. In the driver's seat, I sat for a moment. Didn't start the engine, just stared at my reflection in the dark windshield. I was the youngest. Always the last to speak, the last to be heard, the first to step back. When Mom needed help with errands, me. When Dad needed a ride after a few too many, me. When Trent screwed up and needed a cover story, Guess who? And yet, this. This is how they decided to pay me back. The more I sat with it, the clearer it became. This wasn't sudden. This was planned. The text from Dad, the midnight timing, Trent's damn smirk. It wasn't just a fight. It was an ambush. How long had they been waiting to do this? The phone lit up. A text from Trent. Stay gone. 2 words, sharp, deliberate, like a kick to the ribs after a fall. I stared at it for a long moment. Something inside me shifted. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't hoping this could be fixed over coffee and apologies. This was war. I started the car. The screen lit again. A bank alert. $4,000 withdrawal completed. Checking account. I blinked. That wasn't right. I hadn't touched that account in weeks. Then I remembered. Trent had access once for emergencies. Family emergencies. And suddenly, everything made sense. I pulled into my driveway and didn't even bother turning off the headlights. The soft beams lit up the side of my small brick house. But I sat there, phone glowing in my hand, the bank app open like a spotlight on betrayal. The withdrawal hadn't been a mistake. It was precise. $4,800 pulled from the family trust account. Only 2 people had legal access. Trent and me. I stepped inside, not bothering to hang up my coat. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the fridge and the muffled sound of the heat kicking in. I dropped my keys onto the kitchen counter, walked straight into my office, and sat down at my desk, still in the same clothes I wore when they threw me out. The laptop screen bathed my face in a pale light as I pulled up the full statement. The transaction was dated 10:58 p.m., the same night, just over 2 hours before Harlan slammed the door in my face. Not a coincidence, not a mistake. It was staged, all of it. The authorization signature attached to the withdrawal was laughable. It looked like someone traced my name in a rush, jagged, shaky. It wouldn't have passed scrutiny at any reputable institution, but they knew I hadn't checked that account in months. It was always the family fund, the one I kept healthy in case Dad needed a procedure or Mom's car gave out. A silent safety net, never discussed, just understood. Or so I thought. As the screen loaded older entries, my chest tightened. There, tucked between regular deposits, were 2 more withdrawals. One in March, another in April. Smaller, just $600 and $850. But there was a pattern, spread out, careful, like test balloons, seeing what they could get away with. Trent wasn't just stealing. He was experimenting, testing boundaries, testing me. And when I didn't catch on fast enough, they escalated, right to exile. My heart pounded harder now, not out of fear, but recognition. This wasn't the first time I'd been made the fool, just the latest. A bitter memory pulled itself from the back of my mind, one I hadn't thought about in years. I was 17. Trent had borrowed my toolbox from the shed just for a few days. Weeks passed, then Dad's truck showed up with a busted fender. Trent said nothing, just handed back the tools, smudged with grease and guilt. Harlan asked who'd scratched the side panel. I started to explain. Trent cut me off, smooth as ever. Merrick had the tools out last weekend, didn't you? And I took the hit. It wasn't the first time. In college, Trent had come crying about a design class project. He didn't know how to structure the pitch. I stayed up until 3 a.m. helping him revise it. 2 weeks later, he presented my model in front of his professor and walked away with an A. I didn't say a word. Why? Because speaking up never earned me praise. Only accusations of being difficult, divisive, or selfish. Keeping the peace was the family currency. And I'd been their biggest investor. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. That night on the porch, their faces weren't confused. They weren't shocked. They were satisfied. The kind of calm you see after a job well done. Harlan's explosion, Elaine's silent refusal to intervene, Trent's smirk. It wasn't about anger or disappointment. It was a closing act. I just hadn't realized I was the target of the script. And now the pieces made sense. The trust fund? It wasn't just a gesture. It was their oxygen tank. I had no idea how dependent they'd become on it, until Trent started siphoning it without my knowledge. And he wouldn't do that unless he knew the others would cover for him. He wasn't acting alone. The thought hit me squarely. I was never meant to catch on. I was meant to disappear, quietly, passively, like I always did, because I was the easy one, the dependable one, the one who never said, enough, until tonight. I reached into my coat pocket, fingertips brushing the old house key again. This time, it didn't sting. It steadied me. You wanted me gone, I whispered, eyes still locked on the laptop screen. Fine, but I won't stay blind. I closed the lid slowly, deliberately. The silence in the room now felt different, less like defeat, more like resolve. And then my phone buzzed. A new message from Trent. Do not come back here. We already talked to Dad's lawyer. I didn't react right away. I read it twice, 3 times, then locked the screen. That text wasn't a warning. It was a flag. They weren't just kicking me out. They were preparing something far worse. I stared at the message for a full minute, reading it over again, as if repetition might shift its meaning. But it didn't. Trent had written, clear as day, we already talked to Dad's lawyer. The name Leonard Hayes hit me like a punch to the chest. I hadn't heard that name in years. Hayes was no ordinary attorney. He was the guy you called when you didn't want drama. You wanted results. Cold, precise, quiet removal. Dad used him once during a bitter fight with my Uncle Ron over land that had been in the family since the 40s. I still remember how it ended. Uncle Ron gone, the property signed away, and Dad standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, saying, paper is power, Merrick. Whoever controls the paperwork controls the house. At the time, I thought it was just something grown men said when dealing with grown-up problems. I was 19. I thought I'd never have to play that game. I was wrong. Now that line echoed through my skull like a warning siren from a man who'd taught me too well how to stay silent, and now knew how to use that silence against me. I dragged my chair closer to the desk, opening the secure drive where I kept legal files. My hands were steady, but there was a tremble deep in my gut I couldn't ignore. I typed keywords, flipped through folders, until finally I found what I needed, the scanned trust documents. There it was, my name, Merrick Cole, listed as primary manager of the Cole Family Trust. Not co-manager, not junior, primary. I had rights, protections, obligations, and suddenly I saw it clearly. Last night wasn't an emotional breakdown from my father. It was cover, a performance. An ugly, humiliating show to justify what was already underway. They needed a narrative. They needed a reason to claim I was unstable, unfit, absent. So they gave me one. I leaned back, chest tight, eyes stinging. I wasn't just being shut out of Sunday dinners. I was being cut out of the story altogether. The clock on the wall ticked past 5 a.m. Outside, a pale stripe of light stretched across the horizon. I stood up and walked to the front door, opening it slowly. The cold air bit through my clothes, but I didn't care. I stepped outside, walked down to the driveway, and leaned against my car. I didn't light a cigarette. I haven't smoked since college, but I felt the same instinct to do something with my hands, to anchor myself. I wasn't angry in the way people think of anger. I didn't want to scream or throw punches. It was quieter than that, more final. Something inside me shifted, not a breaking point, a parting, like someone clicking off the last light in a room you'd lived in too long. That version of me, the one who apologized, who stayed quiet for the sake of family harmony, he didn't live here anymore. I closed my eyes and pictured Trent's face when he smirked from the stairs. It hadn't been smug for the sake of cruelty. It had been confidence. They thought I'd walk away. They thought I'd never fight back. They thought I was still that kid who said sorry even when he wasn't wrong. That was their mistake. Back inside, I poured a glass of water, sat down, and powered up the laptop again, just as my phone vibrated. I checked the screen, expecting another insult from Trent, but it wasn't him. It was Marion Price. The name alone stopped me. Marion was a trust law specialist I'd consulted years ago when I first set up the family account protections. Smart, private, and careful with her words. We hadn't spoken in months. Her voice came through groggy but clear. "Merrick, did you mean to send me that email?" "What email?" I asked, already pulling the phone away to check my outbox. She continued, "It came around midnight. Said you were stepping away from trust matters, that I wasn't needed anymore. But it didn't sound like you." My mouth went dry. "Marion, I didn't send anything." There was a pause. Then her tone shifted, sharp and alert. "If that email wasn't from you, then someone's preparing a legal strike," she said. "They're trying to get ahead of any help you might seek. You need to come see me today. Don't wait." My legs felt rooted to the floor, but my mind raced. They weren't just kicking me out. They were covering their tracks, making sure I'd have no legal backup, no support, no way to fight. This wasn't just about family drama. It was strategy, and I was the mark. By the time I pulled into Marion's office, I knew I wasn't walking into a meeting. I was walking into a battlefield. The sun had only just crested the tree line, but the morning air already felt too sharp, like everything I once knew had been stripped bare overnight. I parked behind the building, where no one would see my truck from the street. Small town or not, eyes always found a way to gossip faster than truth. Marion opened the door before I could knock. She was already dressed for war. Navy blazer, not a wrinkle in sight, and a tight bun at the base of her neck. Her usual calm wasn't missing, but her eyes were narrowed with purpose. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't need to. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "You're going to want to sit." Her office smelled faintly of cedar and clean paper. Everything in here was placed with intention. Rows of steel gray cabinets lining one wall, bookshelves packed with case files and legal texts, and several framed wins from past court battles. Too many of them, I now noticed, were family disputes. Names scratched off, legacy torn up and sorted by signatures and not memories. On her desk, a single printed sheet of paper waited. The email. She motioned to the chair across from her, then sat with practiced control. "I printed it as soon as it came in," she said. "Take a look." I leaned forward. The signature was mine, but the words weren't. The tone, desperate, oddly sentimental, a little frantic, was all wrong. It read like someone trying to mimic my voice without ever truly knowing how I think. "They even included an old quote you gave me once," she said, "about stepping back to keep peace in the family. That's not something you'd put in writing, Merrick." "No," I agreed, my jaw tightening. "But Trent would have remembered me saying it." She nodded slowly. "They also tried to revoke my access to the shared case folder right after sending this, but my system flagged it. They used a spoof domain, but not a good one. So this wasn't just Trent, I said. He had help. Oh, he had a blueprint, she replied. I sat back, the room quiet but thick with pressure. The betrayal was no longer a feeling, it was now evidence, and that made it harder to ignore. Marion turned her monitor so I could see. There's more. A draft petition, open on the screen. Her cursor highlighted the header. Temporary transfer of trust authority due to emotional instability. And there it was. My name, connected to phrases like recent erratic behavior, unpredictable emotional outburst, and potential threat to fiduciary responsibilities. They're using the scene from the porch, I said. She nodded. And spinning it into a narrative of instability. They likely plan to file this within the next few hours. I didn't speak. I couldn't. It wasn't just the legal tactics. It was the coldness of it all. My family sitting around a table deciding how to remove me as if I were some diseased limb they needed to cut off. Marion opened a drawer and slid a small flash drive across the desk. This is what changes things. I picked it up. What's on it? Everything they hoped you'd already lost, she said. The original trust documents, your signed authority, the digital logs of every transaction Trent tried to bury, and something else. She leaned forward, her voice lowering. A scanned note. From your father, dated 7 years ago. A handwritten approval of your role as manager. It might not hold weight in court on its own, but it proves intent. I stared at the flash drive like it was a lifeline, because it was. They tried to delete this from the cloud, she said, but I keep local backups, always. I nodded, silent for a long moment. Marion studied me. Merrick, you need to decide how far you're willing to go. And for the first time, I didn't hesitate. As far as I must, I told her. I meant it. Whatever part of me had clung to the hope that this could be fixed with a conversation, a quiet meeting, a simple explanation, it was gone now. Torn clean. The peacekeeper was done. She gave a slight nod, her expression unreadable. Then let's talk next steps. For the next half hour, we mapped options. We could freeze account transfers temporarily, issue a cease and desist to Hayes' office, and file a fraud report with the bank. But the key was timing. Move too soon, and they'd hide everything else. Move too slow, and the damage could lock in. They're banking on you being passive, she said. They think you'll fold quietly. That's how they got this far. They think I'm still the kid who apologized when Trent dented Dad's truck, I said, almost bitterly. They're going to learn different, she replied. Then she paused. Her tone shifted again, lower, more cautious. If Hayes already filed anything overnight, it'll show up at the courthouse by noon, she said. And if it's already there, we may have to respond today. I checked the time. 3 hours. 3 hours to gather, to prepare, to steady myself for what could be the beginning of the real war. And that countdown to noon felt less like a deadline and more like a ticking bomb. By the time I left Marion's office, I could feel the clock chasing me, each minute tightening around my throat. The sun was higher now, casting long, white-hot stripes through the windshield as I pulled out of her lot and merged onto Main. My hands clutched the steering wheel tighter than they needed to, so tight I could feel the sweat from my palms soaking into the leather. The town passed by like a blur, familiar but suddenly warped, like a place I didn't belong in anymore, not the way they were trying to rewrite my place in it. I glanced at the dash clock. 11:03. The courthouse closed for filing at noon. I still had documents to prep, and I needed them spotless. unquestionable. Every red light, every slow car in front of me felt like a personal sabotage. By 11:07, I was talking to the traffic. Come on, move. Like that would do anything. Each turn I made, I kept hearing Marion's voice echoing in my head. You need to be ready. That wasn't advice. It was a warning. Then it hit me. What if I wasn't? What if Hayes had already filed the petition while I was still in her office? What if it was too late? What if everything I'd built, my home, my role in that trust, my name, was already being erased in some clerk's database while I was stuck at another stop sign? That thought cracked something. I jerked the car into a gravel pull-off just past Oak Ridge Road and slammed it into park. I didn't even realize my chest was tightening until I gripped the steering wheel and tried to breathe. But it felt like my lungs had turned to cement. My vision blurred. My hands shook. For the first time since this all began, I felt it. Doubt. Raw and real. I leaned forward, resting my head on the wheel. Maybe it's easier to walk away. The voice in my head wasn't loud. It was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of thought that sounded like common sense if you weren't paying attention. Leave the house. Let them keep it. Let Trent burn it all down. Go start fresh somewhere else. Clean slate. Clean heart. No more games. But sitting there, with the motor idling and the town spinning without me, I realized something that made my stomach twist. Walking away wasn't peace. It was surrender dressed up to look noble, and I'd done that long enough. My phone buzzed. Voicemail. I almost ignored it until I saw who it was from. Elaine. I hesitated, then tapped play. Her voice was clipped, not like a mother, but like someone handling a nuisance. Merrick, if you had just listened to your brother, none of this would be happening. We warned you. You brought this on yourself. There wasn't anger in her tone. No, anger I could have handled. But this? This was cold, dismissive, like I was a stain they were trying to scrub out of the family photo album. I let the silence hang after the message ended. Something inside me shifted. That voice, that same voice that used to read me bedtime stories, bandage my scraped knees, tell me to just let it go, was now part of the machine working to erase me. And somehow, that made it easier. The grief stopped clouding my judgment. The fear didn't feel so paralyzing anymore, because now I knew what I was up against. Not just Trent's greed, not just Harlan's pride, but my mother's silence, her choice to stay silent. I sat up straight, started the car again, and pulled back onto the road. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was 11:29. I moved quickly, but not frantically. I was done reacting. Now I was preparing. Inside, I laid Marion's flash drive on the desk and started printing. Every document she'd restored. The trust agreement. My authorization. The backup logs. The scanned note from my father, handwritten in all caps, clearly stating I was the manager. That one I printed twice. Next came the timeline. I jotted it on a legal pad in big, clean handwriting. 9:13 p.m., Harlan calls me. 1 a.m., I arrive, get locked out. 1:20 to 2:30 a.m., evidence review. 5:00 a.m., Marion finds forged email. 11:03 a.m., start drive home. I added a sworn declaration, just one page, typed, signed, time-stamped, outlining my version of events, names, dates, facts. By 11:41, it was all stacked neatly in a folder. I zipped it into my briefcase, snapped it shut. I felt still, centered, until my phone rang again. Marion. I answered on the first buzz. Merrick, she said, no greeting. Hayes just filed something. Time-stamped 11:56. You need to move. Now. I was already at the door. When I sprinted into the courthouse, I could feel every accusation my family had ever thrown at me hanging in the air like a verdict waiting to drop. The automatic doors parted with a dry swoosh. I didn't break stride. My shoes echoed across the polished tile like a gavel in some unseen courtroom, each step pushing against the weight of everything they'd done. The lies, the signatures that weren't mine, the staged betrayal. Marion was already at the clerk's counter, jaw set, one hand tapping her folder, the other cradling her phone like a scalpel. "They haven't processed it yet," she whispered when I reached her side. I exhaled, not relief, just borrowed time. My briefcase hit the counter harder than I meant, and I slid the stack forward. Printed trust agreements, fraud logs, the email headers with metadata intact, and copies of Dad's old approval note. The clerk looked up at us with a weary mix of interest and dread, like she'd seen this kind of family mess too many times, but still hoped we'd be civil. "I'm here to dispute the petition filed by Leonard Hayes at 11:56, I said, my voice firmer than it felt inside. Then came the creak of expensive leather shoes behind us. "Ah," Hayes muttered too loudly. "Mr. Cole, how timely." He moved like a man who thought the room already belonged to him, tie too sharp, smile too thin. He nodded to Marion with a flicker of amusement that wasn't returned. "We were just discussing your voluntary withdrawal," he added, gesturing toward the clerk. Marion didn't flinch. "The document you're referring to was forged. We have metadata, email logs, and backup originals. You'll see the signature was copied, not applied." Hayes lifted his chin, still smug. "Let's not muddy the waters. The family's concerned. Merrick's behavior last night, emotional, erratic, was cause for alarm. The email simply reflects his recognition of that." My hands clenched at my sides. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. But before I could say a word, the clerk paused, fingers hovering over her keyboard. "You're saying he stepped down," she said slowly, glancing at Hayes. "But his counsel says otherwise, with supporting documentation. I need to log a dispute." Hayes's jaw twitched. "The family believes he's unfit. That's why I'm here." That word, unfit, sat heavy in the air, like a hammer waiting to drop. Then, as if on cue, Hayes reached into his briefcase and slid out another document. "This is supplemental," he said smoothly. "An affidavit signed by Trent Cole." I didn't have to read it to know where it was going. The clerk scanned it briefly and read aloud. "The affiant states that Mr. Merrick Cole verbally threatened the family on the night of July 14th, during a heated outburst. The family feared for their safety, and a decision was made to remove him to prevent escalation." A lie. Brazen and polished. I felt the floor shift. Under me, not physically, but emotionally. As if someone had moved the truth 6 inches to the left and told me it had always been that way. I looked over at Marion, her eyes narrowed. "I have a copy of the doorbell cam," she said. "No threats, no escalation. Merrick barely got a full sentence out before being shut out. Still, the damage was done." Hayes leaned back slightly, satisfied. The affidavit wasn't truth. It was a tool, and he'd used it well. I stepped forward. "My brother stole from the trust," I said calmly. Repeatedly. "I have the transaction logs, bank flags, and my father's written approval of my role. I didn't threaten anyone. I was blindsided." Hayes chuckled softly. "A convenient story, don't you think?" Marion didn't wait. "The bank flagged the withdrawals. They contacted me before we even arrived here today. There's a record of that call." Now, for the first time, Hayes's posture shifted, just slightly. He didn't speak right away. He adjusted his cuffs, a small tick, but I saw it, and then it happened. "You people don't understand," Hayes said, voice tightening. "Your family had every right to remove you before you ruined everything." The silence that followed was brief, but deafening. Even the clerk's hand stilled. "Excuse me?" she asked, eyes lifting. Marion seized the moment. "So, Mr. Hayes, you're confirming their removal of my client was premeditated? Not reactionary?" Hayes blinked. "I didn't say—" "You said before he ruined everything," Marion cut in, firm. "That suggests intent. That undermines the affidavit's claim of spontaneous emotional reaction." Now the clerk's fingers were moving again. Fast. "I'll need to log this hearing as a pending dispute," she said, closing the petition file. "Nothing will be processed until further review. You'll all be notified of the court's next steps." Hayes's smile cracked. Marion leaned toward me, voice low but sharp. "This buys us time, but they won't stop." I nodded, heart still pounding. And she was right, because their next move wasn't legal. It was personal. When I pulled into my driveway that afternoon, I didn't expect to find my father waiting on my porch. He stood there like he had every right, like this was still his land, his house, and I was just some tenant who'd overstayed his welcome. Hands clasped neatly behind his back, feet planted shoulder-width apart. He stared at my front door with the same stern, unreadable look he used when I was 13 and came home past curfew. The difference now? I wasn't a boy anymore, and this wasn't his property to inspect. I parked and stayed in the truck a moment longer than I needed to. Something in my chest wanted to turn the key again and drive straight past him, keep going until the trees disappeared and the air didn't carry the weight of him. But I didn't. I stepped out and closed the door behind me, quietly, deliberately. He turned toward me like he'd been waiting to deliver a sentence. "We need to talk," he said. No greeting, just those 4 words, flat and clipped. I didn't answer right away. I walked past him, up the steps, unlocked the door, but I didn't go in. I let the screen door close between us, a barrier without meaning, but still, it helped. "How'd you get this address?" He didn't blink. "That's not the point, Merrick." "It is to me." He ignored the question and took a step forward. "Why are you making things so difficult?" That tone. The one he used when you broke something and didn't admit it fast enough. As if I had caused all this. As if they hadn't blindsided me at 1 a.m, locked me out of the house I helped preserve, then tried to erase me from the legal documents I built with my own hands. "You think I started this?" I asked, laughing under my breath. "I'm the one defending myself. You all came for me first." "You're overreacting," he said, raising his voice slightly. "That was a necessary wake-up call. For all of us." That made my skin crawl. He said it like it was a therapy session gone slightly off script. Like being ambushed in the dark, lied to, and cast out of the family was some kind of intervention. My pulse started climbing, not from fear, but from that familiar, buried anger. The one I'd spent years pushing down in the name of keeping peace. "You rewrote the story," I said quietly. "You always do." He blinked but didn't flinch. "I protected this family for 40 years. You think this is easy for me?" "That's the problem," I snapped. "You think protecting them means silencing me." His shoulders squared. Then came the real reason he showed up. He stepped in, voice dropping just low enough to sound like it came from the past. "You need to withdraw those complaints. Stop whatever you're planning with that lawyer. Because if you go through with this, your mother, your brother, they'll never forgive you, and neither will I. There it was, not a request, not a plea, a warning, a threat dressed up in family concern. I looked at him for a long time, let the silence stretch. You came all this way to tell me to shut up? I came here because I'm giving you a chance, he said. You cross this line, there's no coming back. Not for you, not for any of us. I smiled, but it wasn't from joy. You think I'm afraid of losing people who already chose to throw me away? His face darkened. The trust exists because of me, I said, because I took the money I earned, because I worked jobs none of you respected, and saved every dollar I could while Trent burned through his. That money protected this family. And now you want to pretend I don't belong in the decisions? His jaw flexed, but he stayed silent. I'm done being quiet, I added. If you push this further, the truth will come out in ways none of you can spin. He took a breath, slow and measured, like he was trying to decide which version of himself to be next. But his poker face was cracking. Sweat had started to bead along his brow, even in the cool air. His voice, when he spoke again, lacked the polish from earlier. You don't understand what you're starting, he said. I stared back at him, calm now, certain. No, I said. You don't understand what you've already done. He didn't have a response. He stepped back down the porch stairs slowly, like a man who wasn't sure if he'd just delivered a threat or lost a war. He didn't look back when he got into his car. He just drove. And as he pulled out of my driveway, I realized the next strike wouldn't come from him. It would come from someone even more desperate. I didn't have to wait long to find out who would make the next move. I had barely stepped back into the house and set my keys on the counter when my phone rang. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the trees, leaving the rooms washed in a dim, quiet blue. I answered only because the caller ID showed my financial institution. The representative spoke carefully, almost too carefully, as if bracing for my reaction. She said someone had attempted to access the trust account using outdated forms. Someone tried to reset the login with Trent's phone number. She emphasized that the attempt wasn't subtle. It was rushed, sloppy, and aggressive. I stood there, steadying myself on the edge of the kitchen island, listening as she described the warnings their system flagged. This wasn't an accident. This was their counterattack, the one my father hinted at when he stood on my porch trying to intimidate me. They weren't slowing down. They were escalating. A tight, cold clarity spread through my chest. Not 30 minutes after the bank call, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail this time. From my mother. The first time she'd called me directly in months. I pressed play. Her voice came through thin and brittle. An attempt at warmth stretched over fear. Call me back, Merrick. We can fix this before it gets ugly. I almost dropped the phone. She never used that gentle tone with me unless something threatened her comfort. Behind her words, under her breath, I heard my brother snap, "Why isn't he answering? Try again." It was enough to turn my stomach. They were not worried about me. They were worried about losing access to the money they'd built their lives on. For years, they'd leaned on me quietly, pretending their stability was self-made. And now that everything was slipping from their grasp, panic was seeping out through every crack. I ended the voicemail and stood still for a moment, letting the truth settle in a way it never had before. I wasn't the son they cared about. I was the account, the deposit, the safety net. And I finally understood what I needed to do. I grabbed the folder of documents I'd spent days assembling. Copies of tax returns, logins, withdrawals, receipts, photographs. Proof of every sacrifice I'd made silently, each one now sharpened into evidence. For the first time in years, I felt solid, clear, not angry for survival's sake, but resolved. Tonight, I was going to end the story they'd been telling about me since I was young. I wasn't chasing vengeance, I was chasing closure. The drive to the family house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your ears. As I turned onto the old road, the house came into view, glowing under the porch light. I hadn't seen it like this since before everything shattered. I parked and stepped out, steadying my breath. My heartbeat didn't race. It slowed. I wasn't walking into chaos. I was walking into an ending. I knocked once. The door opened just enough for my brother's face to appear. His eyes flicked over my shoulder, as if checking if I brought anyone with me. Behind him, my mother hovered, wringing her hands. My father stood deeper inside, stiff as a post. Nobody spoke first. The weight in the room thickened. I walked in and placed the folder on the dining table, the same table where I'd done homework. The same table where they praised Trent for anything, everything, while barely glancing at my achievements. I opened the folder slowly, one document at a time, the trust agreement naming me as the sole controller. Their breathing shifted, the tax records proving years of dependence on my contributions. My mother lowered her gaze. The transaction logs Trent tried to bury. Trent's jaw tightened. And then the deed. The document showing the house, this very house, belonged to the holding company I owned, the one I used to purchase it years ago when they begged for financial help, but refused to let me co-sign anything publicly. They never thought to ask where the money came from. They just assumed the house was theirs by divine right. Silence collapsed over the room. My mother eased into a chair as if her legs couldn't bear the weight. My brother paled. My father gripped the table so tightly, his knuckles lifted white. Before they could gather their excuses, I spoke. I came with a buyer. All three of them jerked their heads up. This house goes on the market tomorrow, I said evenly. You have 60 days to vacate. My father whispered, voice trembling for the first time in my life. You wouldn't. I answered, steady as stone. You already did. That was the moment everything broke open. The begging came in waves, first quiet, then frantic. My mother sobbed, covering her face. My brother reached for my arm, pleading that we could find a family solution. My father's voice cracked as he insisted they never meant for it to go this far. But their desperation didn't move me. For once, I wasn't the shadow they leaned on. I wasn't the quiet son they could guilt into silence. I had finally stepped out from under the weight of decades. I reached for my folder, closed it carefully, and headed toward the door. My heartbeat stayed steady. My mind felt clearer than it had in years. I wasn't leaving with joy, but with something steadier. Freedom. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. And just when I thought the night had given me everything I needed, my mother's voice called out from the hallway behind me, sharp, with fear. Merrick, there's something you don't know. I turned back, bracing myself, knowing her next words might change everything. My mother stood in the doorway, her hand lightly gripping the frame like it might be the only thing holding her upright. Her voice wasn't sharp this time. It was quiet, almost childlike. And for a second, I saw the woman she might have been before the years hardened her into someone else. Your father. He always feared you'd leave us the moment you realized your worth." She didn't look at me when she said it, just stared into the space between us. "We kept you dependent so we wouldn't lose the only steady thing this family ever had." There was no apology behind it, no shame. It was a confession, raw, naked, strategic. I blinked once, twice. My breath caught in my chest. Not because I didn't expect it, but because hearing it out loud gave shape to something I'd always sensed but never dared name. So that's what I was to them. Not broken, not a burden. A foundation. Not the black sheep, the cornerstone. And they had done everything. Every manipulation, every erasure, every cruel silence to keep me from standing on my own. I stepped back toward the threshold, just enough to meet her eyes. "Why didn't you ever protect me?" Her lips parted slightly, but no words followed. Just silence. And that silence answered everything. She had the power. She always had. She just chose not to use it. For me. The silence stretched thin between us. I felt it sink deep, deeper than any anger I'd carried. She didn't protect me because she was too afraid of disrupting the illusion they built. The image of a perfect, unified family propped up by one person they thought would never walk away. Until I did. Then, just beyond her feet in the dim hallway, I saw it. The scuffed leather keychain. The one my father hurled at me during that 1 a.m. ambush. The one that landed near the front door as I was shoved out like some intruder in my own bloodline. Somehow, it had found its way back there. Same object, same house, same silence, but not the same man. I bent down, picked it up, turned it in my hand. The edges were even more worn now, the initials on the tag barely visible. I walked past her, set it on the small entry table, and looked her square in the face. "Keep it," I said softly. "It belongs to the home you tried to build without me." She didn't stop me as I turned. Maybe because she couldn't, or maybe because she finally understood she'd already lost something far more permanent than property. Before I stepped out, I heard my father's voice, strained, brittle. "We can fix this, son. We can all start over." I turned halfway, not out of hesitation, but to give him one final truth. "You ended this long before I ever did." There was no triumph in his face, just the slack disbelief of a man watching the story he thought he authored unravel page by page. Some endings don't explode. Some just fade behind a door that no one bothers to open again. The night had deepened by the time I descended the steps. A cool wind brushed past me as I reached the car. I thought I might feel triumphant, but what settled in me wasn't victory. It was space, breath, the strange quiet of something that had finally stopped bleeding. I didn't rush the drive home. The road seemed wider now, straighter, as though every turn I'd taken in my life had finally led to this one where I got to choose. Not them, not fear, not obligation. Me. At home, I dropped my keys in the dish, exhaled slowly, and sat at the kitchen table. The place felt different. It wasn't the lighting or the temperature. It was mine. I opened my laptop and checked the message from the real estate agent. The buyer had confirmed. The house would be listed by morning. 50 years of legacy, at least what they called legacy, reduced to an address and a line item. And it wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I clicked delete on every voicemail from the past week, silenced every alert, flipped my phone face down and let the stillness wrap around me like a warm coat, and I knew, deep in my bones, that this was what peace felt like. Not loud, not dramatic, just the absence of weight I never asked to hold. I got up, closed the curtains, turned off the lights. Before I left the room, I turned toward the darkened window and spoke, maybe to the house, maybe to myself. Family can be the place that builds you, or the place that buries you. But the moment you choose yourself, really choose yourself, the ground finally shifts. I paused there. Let the air hold those words. Then I said quietly, "What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have forgiven them or walked away like I did?" No answer came, but I didn't need one. I breathed in, deep, full, steady. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the door closing behind me.